Reddit is full of disturbing confessions. In fact, there are entire subreddits dedicated to them. The one we'll cover today was posted by a user whose dying neighbour confessed to murdering 2 people decades ago. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. This video is sponsored by June's Journey, a gripping, free-to-download, hidden object mystery game set in the 1920s in which you'll find clues to solve the murder of June's sister and uncover family secrets along the way. You'll meet a variety of unique and intriguing characters, and you can also customise your mansion and garden island, which is a fun addition. I don't usually play mobile games, but I was surprised to find myself quite hooked on this one. It's very visually appealing with the colourful and vintage setting, and I soon became invested in the storyline. As you know from watching my videos, I love playing detective, so if there's any game that would grab my attention, it would be this one. It's an exciting way to pass time, and it requires you to actually think a bit to find clues, so it's much more engaging and probably better for your brain than mindlessly scrolling on social media. You can download June's Journey for free by clicking the link in the description. It's available on Android, iOS, and PC through Facebook Games, so you can enjoy solving the murders on whichever device you prefer. Around a month ago, a user shared a post on the Confessions subreddit with the title, "I know the person who possibly committed an unsolved double murder." They since deleted the post, but there is an archive of it. It read, "So I'll start this by saying I'm not entirely sure this is true, so take it with a grain of salt. My neighbour of 2 years is a retired Delta Force officer. He has been through some shit in terms of war and its ramifications as far as PTSD and paranoia goes. He can barely walk, and I work at a grocery store down the street from mine and his apartment. I do little jobs for him and get beer and cigarettes, stuff like that. So one day after I come back from the store, he starts talking to me about where he's from. Basically, he was an orphan because of unfortunate circumstances with his mother and father. He was adopted by these 2 rich folks and basically moved to their house with another foster child that today he calls his stepbrother still. Anyway, this old town he lived in and grew up in was your basic industry town and didn't have much to offer. Therefore, like most small town people, resorted to drinking and doing drugs. Well, he tells me that when he was a freshman or sophomore in high school, he was fucking with this one girl that he really liked. I'm not going to give names obviously, but she went to his school and was quite pretty and popular. In his words, "She was the only girl I ever wanted to be with in high school, and I finally got my chance." Anyway, one day after they had an evening of fun, she left off to go back home, but this was a lie she told so that she could meet up with a guy at the park. He proceeds to tell me that me and my friends happened to be at that park and we see her and this popular guy that I fucking hated. Apparently this park was somewhat of a makeout park. Then he says I went up to the car, shot her in the head with a .22, and then shot him in the chest so he wouldn't die and so that he could sit there and bleed out in pain and watch her die in front of him while I mock him. I kind of defensively sat there and went along with his bullshit, but then he brought out evidence that he had grabbed from the car before him and his friends took off. Now mind you, I thought this was absolute bullshit. He is very straightforward and I believe he is an honest guy. He doesn't bullshit and really has nothing to lose considering he is dying of 3 different types of cancer, but I've never had anyone talk to me like this so intimately, especially something so real and crazy like murder. Fast forward 2 weeks from that day with him. I watched one of those unsolved murder docs on YouTube curiously because I wanted to see if anything he said lined up. I have to say though, everything down to a T lined up. It only got worse when this popular documentary, viewed by hundreds of thousands of people, told me exactly the evidence taken from the car that I had just recently been shown by my neighbour. I don't know what to do with this information. Every documentary I've watched on the double murder has been accurate to show it was my neighbour, and they all show the evidence taken from the car that he has in his house after all these years. This happened many decades ago, and I truly don't know what to think of it. Why did he tell me that? Why would he make it up? Why would he have all these missing pieces of evidence that dozens of documentaries say is missing? My only thought at this point is for some reason he's obsessed with the case and constructed all the evidence missing to make it look real, but even I know that's bullshit. He might very well be a psychopath, but he is far from a crazy fangirl. I think he genuinely told me the truth because at this point it has nothing to lose, and now I know of an unsolved murder. How do I deal with this? Going to the police won't do shit, and he has always been good to me and paid me a lot of money and helped me out of bad situations using his military connections. I'm not going to believe I'm a bad person for holding on to this knowledge, but I genuinely want some feedback on what or how to feel in these kind of situations, when you very well be the person holding on to information that an innocent family has been searching for years. Please don't judge, I just feel weird about hearing this from him. It all lines up too well, but he's always been great to me, and like I said, it may not be true, but there are too many coincidences. I can't even imagine being in OP's position and having an acquaintance suddenly confess a murder to me. I think I'd also be feeling quite lost and not sure what to do. As OP says, the neighbour has always been good to him, so it must have come as a huge shock to hear that he apparently murdered 2 people. That said, he seems to be implying that he's not actually going to do anything about this, saying that police won't do shit and that the neighbour has been good to him, insinuating he feels some kind of loyalty to him. While police aren't always overly competent, particularly in cases that occurred a long time ago, it's still worth a try, especially considering the neighbour is apparently in possession of incriminating evidence from the crime. To just use the assumption that they won't do anything to justify not informing them seems very irresponsible. And just because the neighbour has always been good to OP, that doesn't make him a good person overall, and it certainly doesn't absolve him of his crimes. It'd be natural to feel somewhat conflicted in a situation like this, but I really hope OP does the right thing and at least tries to get justice for the victims. Before we continue with the analysis, it's worth acknowledging that we have no way of telling if any of this is true or not. OP himself acknowledged that he's not sure if his neighbour is telling the truth, though he did say the neighbours showed him some unspecified evidence that matched up with what he saw in the documentary, which all but confirms his story. It kinda makes sense if he's dying from 3 types of cancer that he would tell OP, as even if OP decided to turn him in, he probably hasn't got long left anyway. Perhaps he started to feel guilty and wanted to ease his conscience by telling someone, or he doesn't feel guilty at all and finally saw an opportunity to brag about it when he hasn't got much to lose. I'd lean towards the second possibility, as we know he took something from the car after he killed the victims. I can only assume this was some kind of trophy to him, as I don't know why else he'd be in possession of evidence that could lead to his arrest. It is possible that OP is making this whole story up though. It certainly wouldn't be the first time that a Reddit user has fabricated a story like this. The fact that he deleted the post and his account does make me wonder if it is true. Perhaps he panicked that he revealed too much information, but this deletion really doesn't prove anything. Anyway, for the purpose of this video, let's assume it is true going forward. One thing that's particularly concerning about this confession is that if the neighbour killed a girl he really liked and another innocent person just because she lied and met another guy, how sure can we be that these were his only murders? Although it must have been an upsetting situation for him, that's a very minor reason to justify literally taking 2 people's lives, and the way he went about it was so sadistic too. Shooting the guy in the chest so he would have to watch the girl die as he slowly bled out, and as the neighbour mocked him. As far as we're aware, he did absolutely nothing wrong, and for all we know, he was also being played by this girl, so I'm not sure why the neighbour decided to punish him more than the girl. I'm not for a second suggesting that the girl deserved to die either, but it seems that the neighbour's anger was misplaced here. And that's assuming he's even retelling the events accurately. How can we know that evening of fun, as he put it, was even consensual? I'm not necessarily suggesting that he SA'd her or anything, but maybe she wasn't spending time with him totally through her own free will. Perhaps she was playing two guys, or perhaps she was only interested in one guy, and the neighbour misinterpreted her just being nice and hanging out with him, and she was uncomfortable, so she said she had to go. Of course, that's all just speculation, but taking the impulsiveness and callousness of the murders into consideration, I really wouldn't be surprised if the neighbour killed again after this. It does seem like a crime of passion, and sure, he was young at the time, but if that's how short his fuse is, it could well have happened again. The post itself doesn't give many details that might allow us to research and find potential cases that could match the information OP did share. All we know is the following. The murders occurred in a small industry town. The neighbour was a freshman or sophomore in high school, meaning he was 14 to 16 years old at the time. I think. I'm not familiar with the American education system, so please correct me if I'm wrong. The female victim went to the same school and presumably was the same age, but this isn't specified. Apparently, the neighbour shot both victims in a car, meaning that at least one of them was old enough to drive, so must have been 16. This could narrow down the state, as the age at which you can obtain a full driving licence varies in different areas. The states that allow 16-year-olds to drive include Alaska, Arizona, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. However, we also know that the neighbour is retired, so many laws will have changed in that time, and generally, laws relating to driving have become more strict in recent times. It's possible that someone younger than 16 could have gotten away with driving back then. I'm not too familiar with the ins and outs of a Delta Force officer, but according to Google, the minimum age that someone can apply for Delta Force training is 21, and officers must have a rank of captain or major with 12 months of successful command. They must serve for a minimum of 20 years before they can retire, so the absolute youngest age the neighbour can be now is in his 40s, but he's likely much older, based on the significant deterioration in his health. From this, we can presume the murders almost definitely occurred before the mid-1990s. These deductions don't provide enough evidence to help us find a potentially matching case in the first place, but might help to rule out cases that don't fit the few details that are known or can be surmised. This really isn't much to go off though, so how would you even begin to find a match? This didn't stop Redditors from trying, and one of the cases they came across was the 1985 Westside Park murders that occurred in Muncie, Indiana. A police officer found the bodies of 15-year-old Kimberly Dowell and 16-year-old Ethan Dixon, who had been shot to death in Ethan's car shortly before midnight on a Saturday night. Kimberly's stepfather was regarded by most as the prime suspect, though he was never arrested or convicted and always maintained his innocence, stating that the allegations had ruined his life. This case actually matches up quite well with the limited details provided in the post. It occurred inside a car in a park. The victims were roughly the age that the victims in the post presumably were. The neighbour described the girl as quite pretty and popular, and Kimberly was visibly quite pretty and was a cheerleader, so was likely popular too. Ethan was shot in the abdomen and Kimberly was shot in the temple. The holster for a gun was found under Ethan's body, but there was no gun inside it, or anywhere else in the car. Could this be one of the items that the neighbour apparently took from the car before fleeing the scene? The only detail I noticed when researching the case that doesn't match up is the gun used to kill Kimberly and Ethan was a .38 caliber, whereas the post states that the neighbour used a .22 caliber gun, and this is a minor enough detail to make it plausible that the neighbour misremembered or OP got the model wrong. Kimberly and Ethan were murdered in 1985, and if the neighbour was responsible, this would put him at around 53 or 54 years old now. Quite young to be retired and dying from 3 different types of cancer, but not beyond the realm of possibility. This case reminds me of another confession that was posted on an Ask Reddit thread many years ago. The original thread got nuked, so I wasn't able to find the comment itself, but there are numerous posts referencing it, so here it is. This still haunts me to this day. As kids, we had a hideout in this dirt cliff/cove. This is the best approximation I can find on Google, only 3 times taller and probably 10 times as wide. There was a neighbourhood kid who, in hindsight, was probably mentally handicapped in some way, but to us, he was just a weird, creepy kid. This was the 80s and we weren't exactly raised PC. 3 of us were headed to our base and found creepy kid sitting at the top in our guard chair. We yelled at him to get out, and he said something like, "Make me," and started lobbing dirt clods and sticks down at us. We all ran around the side to make our way up. It gets pretty fuzzy here, but all I remember is he fell. I still remember the sound. When we got back down to check on him, he was in a very awkward position with blood coming out of his mouth. We all just freaked out and ran home, and as far as I know, no one has spoken a word of this to anyone. We didn't go back for over a month and never said a word of it between us. Again, this was the 80s, so media wasn't like today. Chances are it got a small article in the newspaper B section, "Missing mentally disabled child found dead after fall," or something like that. Obviously this isn't anywhere near as bad as the first post in terms of the OP's intentions. He and his friends never meant for the kid to die. They were being careless and perhaps even bullying him, and they are to some extent responsible for his death, but this wasn't a cold-blooded murder. This guy probably thought he could ease his conscience by confessing on this post and that would be the end of it, but of course the sleuths of Reddit weren't about to let this fly under the radar, and they came across the unsolved disappearance of Scott Clayshelty. According to the Charlie Project, Scott was last seen at approximately 4:30 or 5 p.m. in his hometown of St. Charles, Missouri. He had left his home on Leverenz Drive and was walking down Ken Drive towards West Adams at the time. A heavy thunderstorm affected the St. Charles area on the day of his disappearance. Witnesses saw Scott walking before the storm hit the neighbourhood and afterwards. He has never been heard from again. He was a student at Coverdale Elementary School at the time of his disappearance and vanished on the last day of the school year. Bloodhounds tracked Scott's scent for about 5 miles northeast on Fox Hill Road, then lost the trail. Authorities searched numerous man-made tunnels and caves in the area and also dredged streams in an effort to locate Scott, but no evidence was produced. Some people believe he drowned in a flash flood, which affected the region after the massive storm, but authorities and his family members believe he was abducted. A couple of similarities between this case and the Reddit confession are that it occurred in the 80s, and it sounded like it occurred in a similar area to the photo OP shared to illustrate the type of area that happened in. I guess if Scott was the boy that OP was talking about, his body presumably washed away in the flash flood and hasn't been found yet. OP didn't provide many specific details in their comment, so while it could match up with the case, it would be a bit of a long shot, as there are probably many more kids that went missing or were found dead in the 80s in an area like that. Countless people claim to have reported this comment to the police, mentioning Scott's disappearance as a possible link, but the case is still unsolved, so it doesn't look like anything ever came of an investigation into the comment, if there ever even was one. As for the first post, who knows if it could provide an explanation for the murders of Kimberly and Ethan, or if the story was a total fabrication. One thing we can be sure of is that Reddit users will leave no stone unturned when it comes to investigating posts like these, whether that brings them closer to verifying a post or solving a case, or further away. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any other Reddit posts or stories you'd like me to cover in the future. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Remember to click the link in the description to download June's Journey for free and become a detective today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday in a new video.